What is there about you that makes you susceptible to encounters with ghosts, ghouls, spirits, to even being possessed by spirits? Because as I said at the beginning, that doesn't happen to most people. So what is there about you that makes you susceptible and doesn't make other people?
I think it's my long hair. I mean, who knows?
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.
Hello and welcome to a special interview for The Wire. Do you believe in ghosts? Have you ever seen a spirit? Do voices speak to you from the other world? If you were to ask me that question, my answer would be an emphatic and resounding no. But that's not the case with my guest. He's just written a book about his many and varied experiences encountering ghosts, spirits, and other sorts of apparitions. Here it is. It's called There's a Ghost in My Room, Living with the Supernatural. Joining me now to talk about his book and his otherworldly experiences is the author, the managing director of Teamwork Arts, Sanjoy Roy. Sanjay Roy, your book is an account of your many experiences with ghosts, ghouls, spirits, and other supernatural presences. In the author's note, you write, I have seen, sensed, and interacted with otherworldly forces and have encountered the supernatural in many forms, such as spirits, spooks, eerie presences, an oppressive feeling of dread, a premonition, as well as being protected from many a danger by the unknown. How do you explain your capacity to sense and see ghosts and even be possessed by spirits? That doesn't happen to the vast majority of people.
You know, the funny thing, Karan, is I continue to be a skeptic. And just the other day, somebody asked me, Aparna Sen asked me, are you now comfortable given the kinds of experiences that you've had? And I said, how can you get comfortable? Your mind immediately sort of A, questions what you're seeing, and B, just the sheer fright of seeing another, which is, a disembodied being, is enough to, have you jump straight up out of your skin. And that's what I do. These are experiences, initially when I was young and I had these, my first being at the age of 5, which I remember, one never sort of put them down to being ghostly experiences. It was just something that I encountered. I was frightened and you moved on. It was only after Punitha and I sort of got married and Punitha started her journey in terms of her journey on spirituality that one started making much more sense of what was happening around us and to us. And it's something that one has to sort of, I suppose, live with, but not necessarily is something that I've got used to yet.
You began by saying you remain a skeptic. How can you be sure it's not your imagination that's playing tricks with you?
So, Karan, the interesting thing is many of these experiences happen not just to me, but as a collective. So, to Punita, to the kids, to our friends around us. And so it's really been a shared experience, whether it was my possession on the bus coming back from Rishikesh. It's not that I remembered what had happened. And the other day, Punita, in her recounting, said, the way that I've written it is only 10% of the horror that they experienced while it was happening, because I was out of it, obviously. So much of what I've recounted there is in what I've heard and in the retelling of what had happened. So it's difficult to sort of say this is just imagination. One sort of puts it to that. But the fact that it's happened collectively, whether it's the bloodletting of our youngest son, Avik, or Aditya, our elder son, experiencing a number of these things, or even Kara, we were just recounting yesterday in Goa some of the Goa stories. So yeah, it's more than just my crazed imagination, though. Yeah.
I come to both the possession on the bus back from Rishikesh as well as your son Avik's experience in a moment's time. But first, let me ask you this. What is there about you that makes you susceptible to encounters with ghosts, ghouls, spirits, to even being possessed by spirits? Because as I said at the beginning, that doesn't happen to most people. So what is there about you that makes you susceptible and doesn't make other people?
I think it's my long hair. I mean, who knows? But yeah, I mean, one has always wondered, Karan, and I remember when Punita's ascended or our ascended master sort of said to me, you need to get your antenna fixed in the way that you catch signals, etc. And I went off to do a Reiki program with Adarsh Puri. And even when I went to do that, I was very, very skeptical, and I sort of steered away from Punita's Karmic Research Center, which they'd set up, because I was like, this doesn't make any sense kind of stuff. But having sort of gone through this Reiki program for what it was worth, it was, in many ways, it sort of tuned my antenna even more to receiving messages, not so much about seeing ghosts, which I always did, but really about receiving messages, which I continue to do if I'm tuned in. The issue being that a lot of the time I have no idea who these people are who are giving me messages, and I'm frightfully averse to sort of passing on the message that I receive, especially to people who I have met for the first time.
Let's at this point, Sanjoy Roy, talk about some of the experiences you've had. I think it would provide an illustration to the audience what an encounter with a ghost is like, what being possessed by a spirit amounts to. This is what you write of a night in Bern, Switzerland. I was in the midst of a dream, mostly about Chinese food, when I woke up with a start, sensing that someone was in the room. A sprightly gent with an immaculately combed goatee in brown tinged with white, sporting khaki-colored trousers and a twill jacket, doffed his Swiss peak cap complete with a feather, leaned forward and said in a very terse voice, "Hello." But when you switched on the light, he had disappeared. That's a very detailed description of something that you saw in the dark. How can you be sure it wasn't part of your dream?
So what had happened, Karan, is, we were staying in the annex to the ambassador's main residence, which is their guest house in Bern. And the annex, like most homes in Switzerland, had no air conditioning. And I get frightfully hot, and it was a very warm day, and I opened up all the windows in the annex and in my room, and it was a full moon night outside, and the annex faced the forest, sort of opened up to the forest. And I was anyway extremely fitful while I was sleeping because I was feeling very hot. The fan that was on the other end of the room wasn't quite helping in any way. And, I'm a very light sleeper, and I have very acute hearing, and that maybe is also one of the reasons why I tend to see more things than other people do. And because the moonlight was streaming straight through the window, I had my eye patch on, and when I woke and took my eye, meaning I had to physically take my eye patch off because I felt that there was somebody there. And when this person leaned in, I was like, in this case, it wasn't so much, it wasn't a bad negative energy that had come to visit, and there have been many in the book, but this was just a very interesting man, but he was so physically next to me, that and the light switch was on the other end of this very vast room that was part of the annex. So, while I was sort of navigating and making sure that he was in my view as I was headed to the light switch, he was pretty much there. So it wasn't that I was sleeping and he had disappeared. Similarly, in Vardalith, for example, when I was in the university room, I thought somebody had walked in who was, room service or a person coming to ask me for something. And so I sit up in bed. I hadn't gone to sleep. I sit up in bed and I say, can I help you? And as I'm looking at the person, I sort of, as I sort of span down, I sense, and I'm like, no hands. And then I go down further and I'm going, aha, no feet. And then I go back to focus on the face and I'm going, no neck either. And it was this and the Swiss were one of the few times that I wasn't terrified necessarily out of my wits. Certainly in the Vardalith one, I was okay. Person stared, I stared back, I stared, he stared back. And then I sort of, turned to the left to say, shall I put on the light? And then when I did that and I looked around, he had disappeared, but he'd actually gone to the other side and was still standing at the window looking back at me. So, these are interesting sort of apparitions, for the lack of a better word. They could be me transposing a figure as I thought it used to be when I was in Tughlaq Road with my parents, in my parents' home. And that I used to put down to when the cassette player went off, click automatically. You woke up and then I said, you're manifesting something. That's how I used to rationalize it in the early years.
The interesting thing is this particular ghost, I'm talking of the Swiss gentleman with the peak cap with the feather in it, actually said hello. If I recall correctly, all the other ghosts, spirits, and apparitions in your book are silent. Why don't ghosts speak?
Well, the ones in Sabdajang Enclave, Karan, spoke a lot, except in a language that I had no idea what they were saying. And they mumbled and they spoke and they wailed and they wept and they impleaded that with whatever message they had. The other energies, so, there are ghosts, and I'm assuming this particular one was a ghost as opposed to some of the others, which were energies. The one that followed us back from Lodi Estate, which was just this red, angry presence, or the orb that sort of hung around our ceiling once. I mean, these were energies as opposed to ghosts. So, one needs to make a distinction between a ghost, an energy, a visiting spirit, an instinct, and the messages that one get, which is a completely different aspect of this experience.
Let's come to the occasion when you were rafting in Rishikesh and got possessed by a spirit. It lasted, if I recall correctly from your book, for 2 weeks, but then it ended very suddenly. As you write, you snapped out of it. What did possession feel like?
It was horrific, Karan. I mean, of course, like I said, I wasn't conscious of what was happening in the initial period of the possession. Everybody else, so Mohit and Tarun and Larry and Viraj and whoever else was holding me down as I kept levitating off the bus seat. And with 5 of these, fairly large, strong people holding a puny me down on the seat, wasn't working. And that continued for a very long period, all the way back to Delhi. And we went straight to hospital. And this is despite the fact that in Haridwar, stopped at a hospital, they gave me sedation, which, for whatever reason didn't work, gave me a couple of shots. And, got to Delhi, went to Oku, to Ashlok, and, the EEG was clear, etc. But it was just that it wasn't me. The only essence that I kept remembering was, how do I get myself to get thrown under a bus and wander off to, do some self-harm. And, family and our friends used to watch me 24/7. But there was something inside me that sort of always was being sly and trying to give them a slip. And I remember at Himanshu and Shalini's reception in Chhatarpur, I had this thing of, make sure that you're able to get away from these people, that they're the problem, and get onto the road and basically throw yourself under, a moving car or whatever.
You mean the spirit that had possessed you gave you the desire to throw yourself under a moving car?
Yeah, it's not as simple as that, but that was, again, it's very difficult to say how that played out, whether it was the spirit or my mental makeup or whatever. But yes, the instinct always was to, yeah.
Tell me this, how can you be sure it was possession and not some strange, inexplicable medical condition that you didn't fully understand?
No idea. It could well have been. Immediately went off for therapy and counseling and psychiatrist, etc. And none of it sort of, matched up, so to speak, to any condition. And as the mutterings of the bus driver kept saying, bhoot chad gaya kind of stuff, was what stuck. And this inexplicable power and energy of, levitating off a bus seat.
This is the spirit lifting you off the bus seat involuntarily.
I don't know, whatever was inside me, giving me that kind of energy that was having me fly off the bus seat at regular intervals.
And this lasted for hours.
Apparently lasted all the way till we got back to Delhi. So Rishikesh to Delhi without the highway on those days would have taken, 6.5, 7 hours, including the stop to get the injections to calm me down, which didn't seem to help at all.
And then 2 weeks later, it just ended.
Yeah, I was so bored of not being well or being possessed or whatever. I was like, what is it that's happening with me that I don't have control over? And I sort of, it's weird, but I just snapped out of it. In an instant, I was unwell one day and the next morning I was bright as a button and back to being me.
Now, the amazing thing, Sanjoy Roy, is this capacity to see ghosts and spirits, to be able to communicate with voices from the other world, is shared with your wife, Punita. How do you account for that? It's a real coincidence that you should have married someone who has precisely the same capacity and qualities and talents.
Absolutely. So Punita is a healer, and that's been her spiritual journey. And what they say is that I'm able to attract very dark energies or negative energies, and Punita is able to heal, much of this that's happening. And if you read the Khajuraho chapter, some of it will start making sense, in the sense of her or our ascended master then said we were all spirits and souls connected 1,000 years ago in Khajuraho, and we've come back together with our soul group to be able to sort out some of our past life karma. And that, the more we share and we go through our lives, it's really that sense of being connected pretty much all the time, and being able to understand, despite, I continue to be a skeptic at one level, but there's also the understanding that, there are things around us that we don't understand. There are things that are unexplained. And
Can I interrupt? As you're talking, the curtain behind your right shoulder keeps shaking in the wind. Is that the wind from outside, or is that a spirit making its presence felt?
Pretty much the wind from outside, or in this case, it's the fan from inside, not even the wind from outside.
The other interesting thing is that this capacity to see ghosts and spirits has also been inherited by your son Avik. You write that when he was 2 years old, you woke up one night and Avik was shrieking, "Wo aa rahi hai." There was blood on the pillow and on the white bedsheet. Tell me about that occasion.
So this was a series of occasions. It wasn't just one. Every night, Avik used to wake up shrieking. and his pillow and his sheets used to be covered, streaked with blood. So we took him to Dr. Pargal, who was his pediatrician, to a number of ENT specialists, thinking that it's a nosebleed or a ear bleed or a mouth bleed. None of that helped. And he continued to have these episodes fairly regularly till one day a friend of ours from college, Madhav Dar, came and told Punita, you need to do this mantra and recite it to Kali. Avik was a favorite of Kali. And she does want him back, but why don't you recite this mantra? And over a 3-month period thereafter, and this was the first time, Karan, that we were, because as parents, you tend to get so desperate when something's happening unexplained to your children. So it was the first time we sort of took to, at which point of time I used to say mumbo jumbo of Punita reciting the mantra. And over 3 months, it totally abated and it's disappeared.
But these episodes continued for 3 months.
They continued for a long period before, and then the 3 months it started abating till it stopped completely. So it wasn't.
It must have been unnerving.
It was totally unnerving. And similarly, Avik, when he was in Narkanda and sussed out that there was this Gandiwali, and we've been to Narkanda so many times that we kept thinking it was the temple in the village as you come in. And every time we said, is this the person? It said, no, no, no. And it was only on the last day when, this friend of ours, this villager, came to fetch us and take us for chai and for apples. Sitting on his balcony, Avik points out to across the valley to this hilltop or mountaintop and says, Wo Wali. And it was a temple that we had never seen in all of the years that we had gone up. And he said, Ye Gandi Wali hai. Aditya too, even now in our home in Gurgaon, Aditya senses somebody coming and sitting at the edge of his bed. It's a lady, and it's the perfume that he recognizes of whoever it is coming to visit. So, these are experiences that we all seem to off and on experience and have.
Now, you've also had occasional spirits or voices from the other world who've spoken to you and they've asked you to convey messages to other people. That's a bit like a medium, isn't it? And what sort of messages are these?
Very, very problematic, Karan. So if I'm sitting in front of somebody and I get a message, it used to be, tell this person she has cancer, or tell this person she's going to have a heart attack. And I used to like, how do you do that? I mean, I don't know the person from Adam or Eve. So I used to tell Punita, there's no way I'm giving this message. And she used to say, well, if you've been given a message, it's your responsibility to pass it on. So I used to do, hi.
Can I interrupt? Was it correct when you were told that this person has cancer or that person will have a heart attack? Did it turn out to be correct?
Yes, but except that I used to tell them, why don't you go and get a checkup rather than, say straight off, and, why don't you just check your heart or check your whatever, because these are people who had also been visiting from outside, except that once you say this to them, Karan, and it comes true, then they think that you know their past, present, and future, which I don't. And I have no intentions of knowing. It's not that I'm an astrologer or a soothsayer or a diviner of somebody's past or present. I've received a message, I've given it, and that's the sum total of it.
The interesting thing is, the audience hearing you speak about these encounters with ghosts, ghouls, spirits, or the voices that you hear from the other world will assume that you respond to it very calmly, very collectedly. You know what to do, you don't panic. Are you completely devoid of fear?
I jump out of my skin, Karan, when I see any of these things that go bump in the night. The messages are easier to navigate now. The messages is not an issue anymore. I receive them. If there is an action that I have to do, I do it. And if there isn't, then I don't. And it's not that I do this on a regular thing. I remember in Suneva Fushi, more recently, we met with a couple who had also traveled in, and this was, during COVID, and they wanted to have a drink, and we sat down and had a drink, and I had a gin and tonic or two. And I just started receiving this message about this lady being in distress about her son, which I then conveyed to her, which of course caused great deal of distress in this couple because they stayed away the whole night discussing what I'd said and, wondering how I'd got this information. And, it's not that I remembered this. It was Madhu Trehan who one day called me and said, did you ever say this to somebody? And I was like, who? Somebody? I don't remember. So Madhu then reminded me that this was something that had happened, some time ago. And, when you get a message, again, Karan, I remain a huge skeptic, and I'm very uncomfortable with giving messages. So 7 times out of 10, despite Punita saying you have to, this is your responsibility, I tend to just hold on to it, especially if I don't know the person. Where I know
Also, I should point out to the audience occasions when you've been irritated by ghosts. You write, often I would sit up in anger at the intrusion and tell them to bugger off. How would they respond when you said that? Would they take offense?
In most cases, they used to then fade into the night. I mean, because if you're firm enough and tell them that you're basically shutting off and you don't want to listen to their weeping and wailing, and that's it. Meaning you cut off the connection that you have consciously or unconsciously with the other, and they mostly listen. I mean, then they go off and not happily, but they go off. They go off into the night. And similarly, I remember when Punita scolded, these 2 women ghosts in our house in Edinburgh, and ticked them off because they'd stolen the keys, they'd taken Lynn's pajama pitas, they were doing all sorts of mischievous stuff. And Punita sort of said, "This is it. This is enough. You cannot be doing this thing." And everything miraculously, instantly appeared. The keys came back to the mantelpiece. The fita of the pajama arrived back in the bathroom. So it's not that they don't listen. They do. It's really about the communication.
Tell me, do these ghosts and spirits and apparitions, do the voices that you hear only happen at night?
No, not at all. I mean, most of the messaging happens through the day.
But the ghosts, do they come during sunlight hours?
Light tends to disappear them. So when you turn on the light, as I do when I'm terrified, and I hate the issue is also I can't sleep at night with a light on or any light coming through any door. So I'm always very consciously putting out lights, even in hotels, in the lobbies and outside, etc., and then wearing my mask and then putting a pillow on top of the mask to cut out any vestige of light. But when they arrive and you do put on the light, then they disappear into it, except the one in Getia, in Tarun and Geetan's house. This was pretty much during the day that we were resting, where Madame Durrell sort of came in to look in at us. And, it was the second occasion that I didn't jump out of my skin. She looked at me, I looked at her. She sort of wandered off. I wandered off. And then Geetan's sister, Gunjan, saw her again, in the same place, sort of looking in at us. And this was during the day. This wasn't nighttime.
Tell me, how often do these encounters happen? Are they weekly? Are they monthly? Or is it just occasionally?
There's no pattern per se, Karan. And it happens like, in Switzerland, who would think in a Swiss place you'd have a ghost? I mean, it's the most ordered, selected thing. You would think you'd have ghosts in Egypt. But in all of the years, we kept doing our festivals in Egypt, going to the Valley of the Kings and the Queens and the Sphinxes and the Pharaohs, never saw, a shadow of a ghost. Similarly, in Turkey, never saw a shadow of a ghost. But they happen, I suppose, whenever they need to happen. What I do know is that, mostly when I get to a place, I can sense where a graveyard or a cemetery or a crematorium is. Even if it's not evident, I pretty much know that it's around. And not that leads to a sighting per se, but I have a sense of what the energy is in a place.
Tell me, what was your last substantial encounter with a ghost or spirit? Tell me about that.
I think the last one, I can't remember whether it was the Swiss one or the Suneva Fushi one, but it's one of the two. I can't remember the timeline.
How long ago?
Suneva Fushi was 2022, I think, or 23. And Switzerland may have been after that. Anyway, I can't remember.
So nothing has happened for a couple of years?
Nothing of this kind, nothing which has made me jump out of my skin has happened for a couple of years. The general sightings or sense that somebody is there has, and then you clean it out, and I now I have to protect myself and cover myself in light and energy to make sure that some of this doesn't happen. So yeah, so one does that, but you have these casual sightings, but nothing that has sort of made me jump out of my skin. What I've related is really the scar tissue memories.
What's a casual sighting?
Casual sighting is, say, I've gone into somebody's home and I've sensed that I was doing a book reading, for example, There's a Ghost in My Room at a bookstore called Quill and Canvas in Gurgaon recently. And towards the end, where I was sitting on my left-hand side, I just felt that there was, energies that were very dark. And I explained to the owner that she needs to clean that up and clear out the space and put in some light, etc. Or in this home in Goa where I am today, Tara, our elder son's partner, was getting in some furniture from Kunur, from an old home, and I was just wondering and scanning it, and I said, Tara, do you have a cupboard that looks like this that you're looking at picking up? And if you are, please don't bring it into the house because it has an energy which may not necessarily be conducive. So keep that away or keep it outside. And then she sent me a photograph and she said, this seems to be exactly what you've described. So, you have these sort of casual moments of.
And they seem to happen pretty frequently.
Yeah, sort of. It's around all the time.
Do you sense anything at the moment as you're talking to me? Both in yourself or in me?
Well, there is a message for you, but maybe I'll give that offline rather than online.
Are you joking or are you serious?
I'm serious.
Really?
And it's a message that you know. It's not that you don't know.
It's a message that I know.
Yeah.
And is it a good message or a bad one?
It's more a self-awareness message about you receiving messages, which sometimes you block because you're frightened.
Okay, I'm intrigued. I look forward to the conversation we have after this interview is over. Sanjay Roy, thank you very much for the time you've given me. Stay safe. And when you next meet a ghost, would you say hello from me?
I will do, Karan. Thank you so much. And best wishes for this wonderful video podcast that you do each week.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
Hi, I'm Karan Thapar. Over the last few years, I hope you've been watching my program, The Interview on the Wire. During that period, I've interviewed doctors, politicians, businessmen, scientists, authors, and even the occasional Nobel laureate. For me, it's been exciting. I hope it's been enjoyable for you. But these, as you know, are tough times, and if this program is going to remain bold, independent, and sometimes even defiant, then I think we need your support. At the end of the day, it's a truism, but editorial independence is best defended by the viewers. So if you would like this program to remain the way it is, forthright, outspoken, and interesting, then would you consider supporting us? All you have to do is to click on the description at the bottom. But more than anything else, I hope you will continue to watch the interview. Your viewership means an awful lot to me.